I was a sophomore when I got my first smartphone, and it's kind of crazy that it all started when I was 15. The internet age for me. It all started with Facebook. I used that on and off. It was like 2010, so everybody was still trying to figure out how to act on the platform. It wasn't until later, around my college years, when I finally hopped on the Instagram bandwagon. I guess I bought into Twitter for like a little while. I think like 3 months before I got bored of it and just deleted the app and never went back. Thank Christ. It was around then that I started to realize a shift on some of these social media platforms. On Facebook, I started seeing people get popular for posting their opinions on their current political views and current events. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the beginning of the quote-unquote thought leader era that we know of today. You know, where we have all these quote-unquote intellectuals giving you their intellectual opinions that are worth their weight in gold and expect you to believe everything that they say. And I remember the most popular people on the platforms were those that had the most like radical, unorthodox, and sometimes downright contrarian views. And it was at this point where I started to see hostility on the internet for the first time. It wasn't outright hostile, but you can tell that people were starting to get, or I should say, becoming less afraid to say what they wanted to say, for better and for worse. And once people started getting offended by some of these views, the first thought battles ensued, which were nothing more than going back and forth in the Facebook comments at the time, but it's funny, I made it sound like it was an epic clash on some giant battlefield. But this set a precedent on the internet, or at least on social media, that people can say what they want and not face any negative repercussions. Now, as somebody who loves free speech, I don't have a problem with this. But what started out as debates started spiraling into full-fledged verbal assaults against each other. When people started debating in front of keyboards instead of face-to-face interactions, people got brave. They said things that they wouldn't say if the person was right in front of them. They refused to see each other as human beings. And when we stop seeing each other as human beings, hostility ensues. Loss of humanity adds to hostility. And at the end of the day, people just knew that they could get away with saying anything that they wanted to without the risk of getting punched in the face. But that was the beginning of rising tensions on the internet, and holy shit, did I not know how bad things were gonna get. Fast forward to today, and discourse online has been the worst it has ever been. At least in 2015, people were calling each other names because they disagreed on contentious issues. Nowadays, we have people sending death threats over someone not liking the same video game as them. Today, we are more connected to each other than ever before, but are we really? The truth is, we were never connected to begin with. It was always just a facade. The connections you've made on social media, the people you're friends with, and the people you follow, it's all a lie. They're not real connections. You don't talk to these people in real life. You don't do things with them. And some you might, right? Like, you know, some family members and friends. I'm not saying everybody, but most people. For the most part, your friends on Facebook and your followers on Instagram aren't your real friends or followers in real life. And deep down, I think we know that. And that's why I think we get so depressed and lonely. We know that we are trading real-life connections for these fake connections online because we get a nice dopamine hit when we get likes and follows on these platforms. So we continue to spend more time on them because they're engineered to keep us glued to the screen. We know this behavior is bad, but we continue to do it anyway because we're addicted. It's no different than a heroin addict getting a massive dopamine spike when he shoots up. He knows it's bad for him, but he can't seem to stop because the brain is a powerful thing. So people are spending way too much time on the internet these days, and it shows, especially in the younger population. Younger people are more depressed and anxious than ever before, and I believe there's a direct link to social media. I'm gonna get into a lot of studies and reviews talking about this later. Believe me, I have receipts, but because of the rampant and unmitigated use of social media and the internet, we've begun to mistake what we see on the tiny screen as reality. We begin to succumb to the internet matrix. The internet begins to drive us insane. So how did we get here? Like most things, the issue is multifaceted, but let's talk about how the internet actually harms us. The first point I want to get into is the inception of the attention economy and algorithms that came along with social media. Social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, even YouTube optimize for time on site. Algorithms push content that spikes emotions like anger, outrage, and envy, Because emotional content performs well. It gets a ton of clicks and shares, and the platforms know that. What type of content is very trendy on YouTube right now? It's a type of content I'm sure most of you watch or have seen on your timeline or even click on regularly. You ready? It's rage bait, baby. You see it everywhere. Everybody is trying to start drama with everyone else online. Everybody is chasing clout for views. Everybody wants a piece of that drama because drama's sensational. It's not boring. People can't get enough of it. How many videos do you see from channels calling out other channels with hyperbolic, sensational titles and thumbnails, saying something along the lines of X gets owned by Y, X destroys Y, X is cooked, X never saw it coming, Y's career is over. And you get the gist, right? But can you really blame the content creators for this? No, not really. They're making content that has a demand. People keep clicking on this slop, so people keep making it. And not all of it is bad, by the way. Some of it I actually am a fan of, and I like. Because there are some pretty sadistic people out there that should be called out for the shitty things that they do. So what does content like rage bait do to us? It puts us on edge. It makes us more hostile, more emotional. It puts us in survival mode. You know, recently I just finished a good book by a man named Steve Magnus. This book is called Win the Inside Game, and in this book, he goes in deep on the importance of our mental state and how we must do everything we can to preserve it in order to achieve peace and prosperity in life. And I don't know if he coined this saying, but I'm just gonna say he did. He coined the term surviving to thriving. He talks about how being put in survival mode actually handicaps our potential to perform in competition and in life. And we're gonna get more into survival mode later in the video. When we feel threatened 24/7, we lose the ability to process the world around us properly. We become more and more susceptible to burnout and anxiety attacks. He was a whistleblower who exposed the doping scandal in Nike, and he talked about how he had to reframe his whole entire situation in order to get him out of the survival mode that he found himself in and into a more peaceful mental state. He had lawyers hounding him 24/7, he had court dates to worry about, he would get attacked constantly, and this went on for years. He lived through a kind of mental hell, and he teaches us how to reframe our situation from a reality where the world is out to get us to a world where we are in control of who we are. And at the end of it all, the right thing to do is always the right thing to do, and you can live with a clean conscience. So the rage-filled content that is so popular and sensational nowadays puts us in that survival mode, where we become more hostile and defensive. Now imagine if all you consumed was rage-filled videos on YouTube and rage tweets on X. You're probably pretty freaking miserable. And misery loves company, as they say. And miserable people love taking other people down to their level. So in this case, I believe it best to stop consuming this type of content altogether, videos and tweets, but believe me, I understand how entertaining some of this stuff is, because the rage drives people to become so emotional that they can't logic to save their life. And let's be real, we can all do better. And this leads me to my second point, which is that social media platforms use dopamine feedback loops to keep users engaged and addicted to their apps. We harped on this a little bit earlier, but we're gonna get more in depth. Likes, comments, and new content deliver micro rewards, and these keep us coming back. Over time, this compulsive behavior becomes cemented in our brains and becomes habitual. And now we just developed a really bad habit that's gonna be very hard to shake. And the scary part is about all this, get this, we never saw it as a problem for the longest time. We're just now starting to catch on to how terrible social media is for our health, for our mental health to be more specific. There have been plenty of whistleblowers throughout the years, but nobody ever took them seriously, until now. It's very similar to how cigarettes were in the 40s and 50s. Everybody smoked cigarettes because nobody knew how dangerous they were until they did. I think social media use is the same. For years, we've had zero constraints, and now we're starting to see the negative repercussions of the rampant social media use. I like to call it internet-induced psychosis, very similar to the newly coined term AI-induced psychosis, which is a real thing, by the way, but that's a whole other conversation. We're gonna park on internet-induced psychosis for a bit, or IIP. And this occurs when an individual spends a majority of their free time on the internet over a very long period of time, until they begin to perceive online activity as reality. In other words, everybody who is terminally online suffers from internet-induced psychosis, or IIP. And this leads them to lash out at people online and in real life, to suffer from extreme anxiety and discontent, and it could even potentially cause an irreversible case of brain rot, where the brain cells start to die due to lack of oxygen that one would get from going outside. In the worst cases, IIP can be terminal, but for most people, it can be reversed by simply getting offline and touching grass. Unfortunately, if the case reaches the brain rot phase, there's potential irreparable damage to the brain, and it may not be reversible at this point. Okay, so I obviously made all of that up about IIP. It's not a real thing yet, but I think there is a grain of truth in that. I do believe that there is some kind of degradation to our psyche when we spend an overwhelming amount of time on the internet. I don't think anybody disputes that. And I really do think that we can lose touch with reality this way. And the real goal of this video is to spread awareness of this fact. I've actually experienced this in real life, personally, where I would see a lot of racially charged content online, and then I would start to perceive the world I'm living in as more racially charged, when in reality, it's just not the case. And I think we've all fell victim to this at some point, if not right now. The internet brings out the worst of us, and worst in us. And it's the crazy views that are the most sensational, the most popular. And when this kind of content is popular, there's going to be more of it everywhere you look, making the radical views seem more mainstream when in reality the views are just held by a vast minority of crazy whack jobs that got their moment of attention they were desperately seeking. I look at it this way: stupid sells and smart is just too boring, and people can't grasp nuance to save their life because they're too stupid to do so. For my third point, I want to talk about how social media incentivizes people to lie. Everybody's a liar on social media, and nobody wants to admit it. You've heard it before, how people on social media post their highlights of their life, making everything seem great and desirable when, in most cases, if not all, that couldn't be further from the truth. We all know people who post about their grand vacations and post pictures of their beautiful families, putting on a front that they're living the picture-perfect life with a white picket fence. Now, I'm not against posting pics of your family and stuff like that, but let's get one thing clear. I have never, in my 30 years of breathing on this beautiful earth, met a family that didn't have some kind of crazy issue that they have to deal with, and most of the time choose not to deal with. Until someone crashes out, of course, then obviously they have to deal with it. The majority of posts on social media are just a snapshot in the life, and nobody is going to post about how shitty their lives are. Now, don't even get me started about fitness on social media. It's only natural that the most popular people in the fitness industry look stunning. I know it's kind of a crazy revelation, but attractive people are popular online. But whether from great genetics or drugs or both, it has set an unrealistic precedent as to how a physically fit person should look. I mean, because of social media, we as a collective society now struggle with unrealistic body standards that everybody thinks they have to live up to, which only adds to the depression and low self-esteem, because we think that if we don't meet these extremely high expectations, then we're failing. But that's not true at all. And the same can be said of areas outside of fitness as well. Think about what hustle culture has done to people. You see a bunch of people on the internet flaunting their nice cars, nice house, and large stacks of cash. But in reality, these people are in the extreme minority. I'm all for being motivated to do great things in life, I get it, but if people struggle to find ways to reach these financial goals, then they may see themselves as inferior compared to people they see online, because they think that to the people online it comes effortlessly. But that's not the case. You never see the hard work and the constant kick in the balls most successful people who make a lot of money had to go through before they got where they were. And in most cases, the lives that they live aren't even that desirable. And another thing is, the thing that most people don't see is that most of these people who flaunt this shit are just what you call business gurus. These people don't actually know what the hell they're talking about and don't actually make as much as they say they do. They rent the nice cars, they rent the nice houses. They also lie about their life so that you may be compelled to spend your hard-earned money on their so-called courses on how to make money. Don't ask me how I know this. Unfortunately, it looks like most people online can't be trusted, so you shouldn't always trust what you see on that tiny screen. Most of the content is bullshit anyway. Anything from news to tweets to any other content online is all packaged in a way to get you to perceive things through a specific lens that supports the person's agenda. Most, if not all, content is biased and trying to manipulate you and how you see things. And thus leads me into doom scrolling. First off, what is doom scrolling? We hear that word a lot, but do we actually know what it means? Doom scrolling is the act of compulsively and excessively consuming negative news online, often through social media or news feeds, according to Google. And I'd say that's pretty accurate. Now, it should also be said that most of the news is negative to begin with, so you could just say that scrolling through news itself is doom scrolling. But anyway, this harkens back to what I said earlier about raising our threat levels and putting us in a state of survival mode, and that's what doom scrolling does. It puts us into fight or flight. Our sympathetic nervous system activates. We start to identify threats more, and life becomes less of a walk in the park and more of a minefield. But it's a reality we make for ourselves. The consumption of this kind of media can dramatically affect the way you see the world if you do this excessively over a long period of time. I don't usually doom scroll anymore, but one moment in time where I did doom scroll quite a bit was the 3 months leading up to the 2024 presidential election. And let me tell you, the discontent was palpable. Everything I'm talking about here, I felt then. And I think it also had a lot to do with the fact that everybody was nervous and everybody was on edge because it was just such a crazy election cycle. I think the internet landscape during the 2024 election actually led to a sort of mass hysteria or mass psychosis. I mean, when Trump won the election, there were people on the political left who were literally hysterical. They were not acting rational at all. Like, some of these people were screaming in their cars, people having temper tantrums, people sending death threats to Trump supporters, all because their political candidate didn't win. I mean, newsflash, guys. This happens every 4 years to somebody. It's not the end of the world, but here's the thing. The media made it out to be the end of the world. And these people were just acting as they would if the end of the world was near. The media kept using inflammatory language like Trump is Hitler and that he and his supporters are racist Nazis, and they stuck with a narrative ad nauseum. So no wonder there were people out there who actually thought that. Probably a big reason the sitting president was almost assassinated, but that's a whole other discussion. I'm saying all of this to express a truth, that none of that stuff that was being spouted on the internet was true. None of it was real. Trump wasn't Hitler. He and his supporters are not Nazis. To say that they are just shows that people are vastly uneducated, and because of that, are susceptible to social media manipulation. The political rift that we have today was orchestrated on the internet, not in real life. The division that we face today was created by what we saw on TV and on the smartphone screens, not reality. And if we want to get back to how things used to be with less division and more peace in our lives pre-internet, we need to learn how to use it responsibly. Okay, I do want to get into some of the data a little bit here, so you know that I'm not just talking out of my ass. And all the studies I'm going over here are going to be in the description as well, so you can read them for yourselves. I also want to note that the majority of these studies emphasize correlation, not outright causation, and will list some uncontrollable variables. But when it comes to the longitudinal studies in particular that control for all of these things, or at least most of these variables, the links we see do persist. All right, coming at you, rapid fire. There have been large adolescent surveys and analyses that show a link between heavier social media usage and screen time and higher rates of depression and suicide-related outcomes in teens. Meta-analyses and reviews found a small to moderate association between social media use and depression and anxiety. And when it comes to body image, research flagged image-based platforms like Instagram as harmful for body image and anxiety in young people. So there's some real numbers for the nerds out there like me, but now I want to get into some of the things that these social media platforms don't tell you. And in most cases, it's what they don't tell you that is the most damning. So as I mentioned earlier, the design of the platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and X all center around the same goal to keep you on the platform by any means necessary, right? When you stay on the platform, the companies get more in ad money. So every scroll, every autoplay, every notification ping all nudge you to stay engaged, and this in turn exposes you to more ads, which gives the platforms more money. You are literally the product making these companies money. They use the path of least resistance to keep you on. They autoplay videos, they give you an infinite scroll, they give you many ways to engage with other content and for others to engage in your content. And it works. But just us knowing how these platforms operate gives us an edge, because we're no longer in the dark about how these things work. We can see the manipulation happening in real time and fight back. We can start to win back our lives. And winning back our lives is where I want to shift to next. Social media isn't a good or a bad thing. Sure, the way they operate can be somewhat nefarious, but at the end of the day, we can control how we use it. It can definitely be a bad thing if we developed habits of excessive use, but it can also be a good thing if used in moderation. Which is why I like to come up with some rules that I follow anytime I want to use social media like YouTube or the likes. I mainly use YouTube nowadays. I don't use any of the other stuff. But these rules help me to keep my usage to a minimum. Because when I didn't have these rules, I'd go off on YouTube binges for like an hour or sometimes hours, which was absolutely fantastic for my attention span, if you can tell. But I digress. And I also want to mention that this can go in a million different ways, and I don't expect everybody to have the same rules when it comes to social media usage. But I think it would be best if we all had some rules we go by. It gives us much more time to just unplug and touch grass, to slow your mind down and actually relax. So here's what I do. I only use social media when I'm eating. Every time I cook a meal for myself, I'll sit down and eat it and put on a YouTube video. Eating is YouTube time. And when I'm finished eating, YouTube turns off. No ifs, ands, or buts. Non-negotiable. It turns off. And that works for me. I mean, I also use Spotify here and there in the car or while I'm doing like chores outside or inside. I'll also listen to a podcast when I'm walking. I also use YouTube in the car sometimes, but I have some rules for this. It needs to be a 20 or more minute video, simply because that's about the time it takes for me to go to the gym or go to Aldi, and those are the two places that I go besides home. And this just allows me to not have to scroll for another video in the middle of the ride. I don't use YouTube before bed like I used to. It's just too much mindless scrolling to me. I use YouTube on my smart TV. But nowadays I just turn on Crunchyroll or Netflix, and it works out pretty well for me. Setting boundaries is the best way you can truly start to enjoy things again. Seriously, try taking a week off of social media like YouTube or something and come back to it. It's amazing. I love it. You get resensitized to the whole experience. When we're constantly on these platforms, we become so desensitized to them that we don't actually enjoy them anymore. We're just addicts at that point. So I recommend taking some time off of social media and coming back to it later. Trust me, dude, it enhances the experience. And here's something that I just started doing. I started trimming the fat on my social media accounts. Now, what I mean by this is I chose to unsubscribe to certain channels that put me on edge or that just didn't serve me anymore. I highly recommend this. It will save your algorithm. And here's like a quick tip, which I'm sure most of you know this at this point, but when you're on YouTube, be careful what you watch, because even watching like 1 or 2 videos can like completely mess up your algorithm to the point where you'll start getting like several videos of a certain type of video that you accidentally watched like 30 seconds of. But another thing that I started doing, which actually turned out to be a staple for me daily, when I take my breaks in between work, instead of scrolling on YouTube, I decided to go for a walk instead. And it's the best decision I've ever made. I love walks, and most of the time, I don't even bring my phone. Sometimes I bring it to listen to a podcast, but most of the time, I just spend the time thinking to myself. You see, we spend so much time consuming that we don't really think anymore. We don't have ways of entertaining ourselves. I'll start off my walk just clearing my mind, but 15 minutes in and I'm starting to have full-on conversations with myself and God, and I'm getting great ideas for content and life. I just feel refreshed. I highly recommend it. At the end of the day, we can all do a bit better when it comes to how we use social media. And I truly believe that if we all start to minimize our time on the phone and spend more time outside and in actual conversations with people, I think we'll all come back to the truth of reality that we aren't all that different from each other. We all come from the same God, all equally valuable and worthy of respect and dignity. We need to get back to that, man, and things don't have to be this bad. That's my hope, that we all wake up from this and start taking steps in the right direction. Thank you all so much for watching. If you made it this far, I hope I've earned your subscription. If you're new here, my name is Christian. I'm a weightlifter gamer. I play role-playing games on this channel and give my raw reactions to them. I also give you fitness advice and videos like this, where I make videos talking about topics on the internet that I think are important. Make sure you like the video and click that notification bell as well to be notified of my next upload. And let me know in the comments your thoughts. I read all of your comments. I appreciate you guys. It also helps your boy out with the algorithm. And until next time, stay awesome. Peace and God bless, y'all.